Internet family, here's chapter 4 of Winged Pharaoh. I own no right to this book. If you like it, go buy it. It's online, first published by Joan in 1937, and now it's published by Ariel Publishing. Chapter 4. Excuse me if I do this, by the way. There are lots of mosquitoes, and also there's yard work going around, so I apologize for the loud sound in the background if the mic is picking that up. All right, here we go. Chapter 4, Nea's Newest Adventure. Sometimes Mata used to take Nea and me for walks along the riverbank. It was quite a long way from the palace, so we usually went as far as the river in a litter. We used to see the fishing boats and want to go on them, but Mata wouldn't let us. One day, Nea told me he wasn't going to have Mata interfering with what he wanted to do, and if I liked, he would let me join in his newest adventure. And I said, of course I'd like. It wouldn't be a proper adventure without me in it too. So the next morning we got up very early, when it was only just beginning to get light, and we put on our very oldest clothes so as to look like village children. First, we climbed over the wall of the vineyard and picked 4 of the best bunches of grapes. Nea carried them, and I took some figs and put them in the napkin with the 4 little loaves of bread that I'd hidden in my room the night before. We walked a very long way until we came to the river. A little way along the bank there were some fishermen getting their boats ready. Nea went up to the oldest of them and asked if he would exchange some fish for the grapes. The man said that he would, but that we were too early, for he was only just setting out to spread his nets. Nea pretended to be very surprised and said sadly, "We will have to wait until you come back, for we dare not go home without fish, or our uncle will be angry with us." And then he said, "Can my sister get into your boat just for a moment? She has always longed to go in one, and then we'll just sit on the bank and wait until you come back." The fisherman seemed to be fond of children. He told us that he had 5 of his own, and he said, "If you are very good and sit in the bottom of the boat and don't get in my way, you can both come with me." So we thanked him very much and jumped in quickly before he could change his mind. The nets were piled up in the bottom of the boat and smelled very fishy. The boat was very clumsy. It had no paintings on it, and the sail was stained and patched, but the wind soon took us out into the middle of the river. The nets were thrown over the sides, and they trailed out beside the boat while it moved slowly downstream. The fisherman was a very nice man. I didn't like to ask him his name in case he asked us ours, and we hadn't arranged what we would say. He let Nea hold the steering oar for a bit, and I made a face at Nea to remind him that he mustn't show he knew how to do it because we had both said we hadn't been in a boat before. Then I asked the fisherman if he would sing us one of the songs we had heard from the bank, but never clearly enough to hear the words. He had a nice voice, very loud and deep. The song didn't have much tune, just 2 or 3 notes like a sort of chant. "Oh, my net, swing widely for your master. Call to the fish that you would give them shelter from the monsters of the river. Oh, fish, leave the caverns of the reeds and drowse in the shadow of my boat. Blow softly, wind, so that my boat glides through the water, quiet as a naked girl swimming at sunset. Oh, fish, hear me, and join your brothers in my net, so that it be weighted with silver, so that all my family rejoice with me." Then he called to the other man, who was right up in the front of the boat, hidden by the sail, and they started to pull in the nets, with Nea and me helping. The fish poured over the side in a wriggling silver flood. They jumped and flapped against my legs, and I would have liked to climb up on the side of the boat, only Nea didn't seem to be minding it. He was helping the men to sort the fish into different kinds and put them into reed baskets. I think if there had been any eels, I would have had to get out of the way, but luckily there weren't. When we got back, there were several people on the bank waiting to get fish. For a moment, I was afraid they might recognize us, but I looked at Nea and was sure we were all right because there were scales all stuck to his arms and smears of fish blood on his forehead. Nea tried to give the fisherman the grapes as a present for taking us out in his boat, but he laughed very friendlily and said, "You shall have 4 fine fish for the grapes and 2 extra for helping me, and you can come out with me any time you like. Ask any fisherman where Doss is, and they'll always tell you where to find me." Then he threaded 6 fish on a reed through their gills and gave them to Nea. We thanked him very much for everything and set off for home. It seemed a much, much longer walk than it had on the way out. I got tireder and tireder, and the loop song of my sandal broke, and every time I walked it flapped, and then a stone got in and cut my foot. Nea knew how tired I was, but he said, it was just one of those things that thinking about made worse. And I said, well, you haven't got a sore foot. And when I've got a sore foot, it's the thing I think about. And Nea said, if you fuss about a foot, you'll never be able to come with me when I'm a warrior. Warriors are always getting spears stuck into them and arrows, and quite often they get hit by mace heads, but they're so brave, they hardly notice it. They certainly don't make a fuss. After that, I would have gone on walking until my feet were worn right off. It must be much easier being born a boy, because then you don't have to keep on pretending to be brave to get taken on adventures. You just go anyway. Then Nea said, I'll tell you a new story. Listen very hard, and you'll forget about being tired. In the middle of a garden, there was a very large and beautiful pool. It was tiled in turquoise color, and fresh water always ran into it through a little stone channel and out again through a grid at the other end. In it, there lived a lot of very, very fat, contented fishes, and one little scarlet fish. The big fat fishes ate up all the flies and all the worms, and they took for themselves all the nicest shadow caves which the lotus leaves made. But the poor little scarlet fish had very little to eat, and no private place where he could sleep out of the hot sunshine. He couldn't spend his time eating or being lazy in the shade, so he had to do a lot of thinking to keep himself from going sad. And he explored every bit of the pool until he knew just how many tiles were on the walls and which lotus bud was going to open next. The fat fishes got greedier and greedier, and the little scarlet fish got thinner and thinner, until one day, when he was swimming past the grating, he knew that he was thin enough to swim right through it. It was rather a struggle getting through, and he lost quite a lot of his scales doing it, but at last he was free. He swam down the water channels until he got to the great river, and he swam on and on down the great river until he came to the sea. And there he found lots of things that were very beautiful and lots of things that were very frightening. Once he saw a fish so big that it could have drunk the whole of his home pool for breakfast and still have been thirsty. The great fish was swimming along with his mouth open, collecting his breakfast, just like a fisherman drawing in his net. And the poor little scarlet fish prayed very hard to the god of fishes, and the god heard him, in spite of his being in such a dark place. And the god made the big fish have hiccups, and he hiccuped the little scarlet fish back into the sea again. Then the little scarlet fish found a beautiful palace of coral in the clear, deep depths of the sea, and a beautiful little fishes with blue and gold spots brought him the most lovely fat worms on mother of pearl plates. He enjoyed it so much that he might have stayed there the rest of his life, but he wanted to go back to his own home pool and tell the fat fishes all the exciting things they were missing by being too big to go through the grating. So he left the sea and swam back up the river. And on the way he had many more adventures, and some were nearly as beautiful as the palace of coral, and some were nearly as dangerous as being swallowed up by the great big fish. And he swam up the long river and up the water channels until he came to his own grating. And now he was so thin from all his adventures that he got through it quite easily. He thought everybody would be very surprised to see him again, but nobody had even noticed he had been away. He swam up to a very big fat fish, who is the kingfish of the pool, and he said, "Stop eating and blowing bubbles and listen to me, you fat and foolish fish. I've come to tell you of all the wonderful things that have happened to me on the other side of the grating, and I shall teach you to grow thin, so that you, too, may go up on the same journey and become as wise as I am." The fat fish swam toward the grating, and we saw the bars were so close together that not even one of his fins could go between them. He blew 2 bubbles, slowly and scornfully, and said, "Silly little scarlet fish, do not disturb my meditations with your foolish chatter. I am much wiser than you are, for I am king of all the fish. How could you have gotten through the grating when I could not put a fin through it?" And the big fat fish swam back to the shadows under the lotus leaves. The little scarlet fish was very sad that nobody would listen to him, so he slipped through the grating and swam back towards the sea. Quite soon afterwards, there was a drought, and the water channel ceased to flow. The fish pool got lower and lower, and the fat fishes got more and more frightened until they lay gasping in the mud at the bottom of the pool, and then they died. But the little scarlet fish was living very, very happily in the coral palace under the sea. It was such a lovely story that I had forgotten about my sore foot. When Nea had finished, we were at the edge of the vineyards. I took off my sandals and walked along the water channels beside the vines, and it washed the rest of the soreness out of my foot. Then I remembered Mata and how cross she was going to be, so I said, Nea, do you think we should bury the fish or give them away to the gardener so Mata won't know where we've been? And Nea said, no, it was such a good adventure, I'm going to tell Father about it. And anyway, I want to send a present to the fisherman because he was so nice to us, but we won't let Mata see us until we find Father. We saw him coming out of the room that leads to the Hall of Audience. He still had on his ceremonial beard, which he wore only when sitting in judgment. It was fixed to the headdress by 2 straps, hidden by the side pieces. He took off his headdress and gave it to the attendant, and said he was going for a bathe in the pool and that we would go with him. He wasn't surprised to see us, so Mata couldn't have told him about losing us. When we showed him all the fish and told him all about our adventure, he wasn't at all cross, although he did say we ought not to have gone out without telling somebody. And Nea said, I would have told Mata, but she would only have told me not to go, and I didn't want to be rude and disobey her. And Father said we could eat the fish that evening. Then Nea asked him if we could have a present for the boatman, and he said we could go to New Cities and ask him to make us something. New Cities had a lovely little gold fish for wearing round the neck, and he scribed my name and Nea's on it. Next morning, we put on our best clothes, and Harka took us in a chariot down to the river to give Das his present. When he realized who we were, he would have knelt upon the ground before us, but Nea told him we were all fishermen together, and I tied the fish round his neck. That was chapter 4. Winged Pharaoh, such a good book. Stay tuned for chapter 5. I'll record it another day.